After 12 years of building Summit Marketing Solutions from a struggling startup into a powerhouse agency, my boss, Mark Thompson, called me into his office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and told me I'd be training my replacement. What he didn't know was that every major client contract in our portfolio specifically named me as the primary contact, and when the truth came out during what was supposed to be my farewell meeting, both Mark and my so-called replacement, Jessica, discovered that removing me meant losing $12 million in annual revenue. The look on Mark's face when TechFlow Industries' procurement director stood up and announced they'd be following me wherever I went was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building those relationships. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for the past 12 years, I've been the backbone of Summit Marketing Solutions here in Austin, Texas. When I started at this digital marketing agency, we had exactly 3 clients, a leaky office above a taco shop, and dreams bigger than our bank account. Mark Thompson had just been promoted to regional director, and I was an eager graduate with a marketing degree and student loans that kept me awake at night. Those early days were a whirlwind of 18-hour workdays, coffee-stained presentations, and the kind of hustle that comes from knowing failure wasn't an option. While Mark schmoozing with potential investors at expensive steakhouses, I was the one actually building the campaigns, nurturing client relationships, and turning our wild ideas into measurable results. I remember sleeping on the office couch more nights than I care to admit, not because I had to, but because I genuinely loved what we were building together. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took years of meticulous relationship, building, late-night strategy sessions, and the kind of attention to detail that turns good campaigns into great ones. I wasn't just another account manager pushing generic solutions. I took the time to understand each client's industry, their pain points, their competitors, and most importantly, their people. While other agencies treated clients like numbers, on a spreadsheet, I treated them like the complex businesses they were, run by real people with real challenges. My breakthrough came during my 3rd year with our first major client, TechFlow Industries. They were a mid-sized manufacturing company looking to modernize their digital presence, and every agency in town was pitching them cookie-cutter solutions. I spent 3 weeks learning everything about their industry, shadowing their sales team, and understanding their customers' journey from awareness to purchase. When I presented my strategy, it wasn't just a marketing plan. It was a complete digital transformation roadmap that addressed problems they didn't even know they had. David Rodriguez, their procurement director, later told me that my presentation was the first time a marketing agency had spoken their language instead of just throwing around buzzwords. That contract launched my career and established the foundation for everything that followed. Within 6 months, TechFlow's digital engagement increased by 300%. Their lead quality improved dramatically, and their sales team was actually thanking the marketing department instead of complaining about unqualified prospects. Word spread quickly in Austin's business community. Success stories have a way of traveling fast, especially when they involve measurable results and genuine partnership rather than empty promises. Riverside Retail Group reached out after hearing about TechFlow's transformation. Mountain View Manufacturing came to us because their biggest competitor was seeing amazing results from our work. Coastal Construction Company practically begged us to take them on after watching 3 of their rivals gain significant market share with our digital strategies. But here's what Mark never understood, and what ultimately became his downfall. These clients weren't just buying services from Summit Marketing Solutions. They were investing in relationships with me specifically. Every strategy session, every campaign review, every crisis management call, every celebration of exceeded goals happened because I was there, consistently, year after year, understanding their businesses better than they sometimes understood themselves. By my 5th year, I was managing 60% of the company's revenue single-handedly. By year 8, that number had grown to 75%. Mark loved to take credit during board meetings and industry conferences, presenting himself as the visionary leader who built these incredible client partnerships. Meanwhile, I was the one answering their calls at midnight when campaigns needed adjustments, flying to their offices for emergency strategy sessions, and consistently delivering results that exceeded their expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Mark collected accolades and bonuses for my work, I remained at the same salary level I'd been at for the past 3 years. Every time I brought up advancement opportunities or compensation adjustments, Mark would deflect with promises about future equity stakes or vague mentions of upcoming promotions that never materialized. He had a talent for making me feel like I should be grateful for the opportunity to work so hard for so little recognition. Linda Parker, our founder and CEO, seemed oblivious to the actual dynamics of client management. She was brilliant at the big picture strategy and company vision, but the day-to-day relationship building that actually generated revenue was completely outside her wheelhouse. During her quarterly visits to our Austin office, Mark would orchestrate elaborate presentations where he took center stage, discussing client strategies and campaign results as if he'd personally developed every creative concept and managed every client relationship. I watched this performance with a mixture of frustration and fascination. Mark had perfected the art of corporate theater, complete with PowerPoint presentations filled with my work and client testimonials praising strategies I'd developed. He'd reference conversations with clients that I'd actually had, quote insights, from reports I'd written, and present campaign results from initiatives I'd conceptualized and executed. Linda would nod approvingly, clearly impressed by Mark's apparent client management expertise. The most painful part wasn't just the lack of recognition. It was watching Mark actively undermine my direct relationships with clients during larger meetings. Whenever clients would specifically ask for my input or reference previous conversations we'd had, Mark would smoothly redirect the discussion back to himself, often with phrases like, "Sarah and I were just discussing that," or, "As I was telling Sarah earlier." He had a gift for making it seem like every good idea originated with him, while every challenge or setback somehow reflected my inexperience or need for his guidance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bob Williams, our senior account manager who'd been with the company since its inception, saw through Mark's performance from day one. Bob was approaching retirement but had decided to stay on specifically to mentor younger team members and help maintain the company culture that Linda had originally envisioned. During our coffee breaks, he'd shake his head and mutter about how different things had become since Mark's promotion. Bob had watched Mark systematically take credit for other people's work throughout his tenure, but my situation was particularly egregious because of the scale and importance of the accounts I managed. Bob would often remind me that client relationships in our industry were built on trust and personal connection, not corporate hierarchy, and that truth had a way of revealing itself when it mattered most. The warning signs of what was coming started appearing about 6 months ago, though I didn't recognize them at the time. Mark began inserting himself more aggressively into my client communications, copying himself on emails that had previously been direct correspondence between me and my contacts. He started scheduling duplicate meetings with my clients, ostensibly to provide senior leadership oversight, but increasingly excluding me from discussions about strategic direction. Jessica Chen arrived at Summit Marketing Solutions 4 months ago as a senior marketing strategist, though her background was primarily in generic digital advertising rather than the specialized relationship-based approach that had made our agency successful. She was smart, ambitious, and clearly eager to make her mark, but she lacked the deep industry knowledge and client relationship experience that our major accounts required. Mark introduced Jessica as someone who would be learning our processes and supporting major account management. Initially, I was excited to have additional help, especially someone with fresh perspectives and energy. Training new team members had always been one of my favorite responsibilities, and I genuinely enjoyed sharing the knowledge and strategies I'd developed over the years. What I didn't realize was that Mark's definition of learning our processes actually meant learning to replace Sarah's role entirely. The training sessions that I thought were about professional development and team building were actually Mark's systematic plan to transfer my relationships, my knowledge, and ultimately my position to someone who would be more willing to let him take credit for her work. Jessica seemed genuinely interested in understanding our client relationships and campaign strategies, asking detailed questions about communication styles, decision-making processes, and the historical context behind various strategic choices. I shared everything generously, thinking I was building a stronger team and creating better support systems for our clients. Looking back, I realize I was essentially documenting my own replacement manual. The shift in Mark's behavior became more obvious as Jessica's training progressed. He began referring to Jessica's ideas when discussing strategies I'd developed, crediting her with insights from client meetings she'd observed but not led, and generally positioning her as the innovative new talent who was bringing fresh thinking to our established accounts. Meanwhile, my own access to high-level strategic discussions began diminishing. Mark would schedule client strategy sessions during times when I had other commitments, then fill Jessica in on the discussions afterward. He'd make decisions about campaign directions without consulting me, then present them as collaborative choices that the team had made together. The most troubling development was Mark's new habit of second-guessing my client communications and campaign recommendations. Strategies that had been working successfully for years suddenly required his approval before implementation. Client requests that I'd previously handled autonomously now needed to be filtered through Mark's oversight, creating delays and confusion that frustrated both me and our clients. David Rodriguez from TechFlow Industries mentioned during one of our quarterly reviews that communication had become more complicated recently, with more people involved in decisions that used to be straightforward. Carol Anderson from Riverside Retail Group made similar comments about feeling like she was getting mixed messages from different team members about campaign priorities and strategic direction. I tried to address these concerns directly with Mark during our one-on-one meetings, but he had a talent for deflecting responsibility while making me feel like I was overreacting to normal business evolution. He'd explain that bringing Jessica into major account management was simply about building redundancy and ensuring continuity as the company grew. He'd praise my work while simultaneously suggesting that I needed to be more collaborative and less possessive about client relationships. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. On one hand, Mark continued to rely heavily on my expertise, client knowledge, and relationship management skills to maintain our revenue stream. On the other hand, he was systematically diminishing my role, transferring my responsibilities, and positioning Jessica as the future of our major account management. Bob Williams watched this transformation with increasing concern, often pulling me aside to discuss what he was observing. Bob had seen similar patterns throughout his career, usually preceding significant organizational changes that rarely benefited the people who had built the company's success. He encouraged me to document my contributions more carefully and to pay attention to the legal and contractual details of my client relationships. Bob's advice proved more prescient than I realized at the time. He suggested that I review my employment contract, particularly the sections about client relationships and intellectual property. He also recommended that I maintain copies of client communications, campaign results, and strategic documents that demonstrated my role in developing and managing our major accounts. The documentation process revealed something interesting that I'd never paid much attention to: the actual language in our client contracts. While Summit Marketing Solutions was listed as the service provider, the contracts also included specific clauses about key personnel and relationship management. Several of our major clients had insisted on contractual language that identified me personally as the primary contact and relationship manager for their accounts. These clauses had been included at the client's request, often after they'd experienced disruptions with other agencies due to account manager turnover. David Rodriguez had specifically insisted on this language after TechFlow's previous agency had switched account managers 3 times in 2 years, creating continuity problems and strategic confusion. Similar clauses existed in contracts with Riverside Retail Group, Mountain View Manufacturing, and Coastal Construction Company. The implications of this contractual language didn't fully register until Mark's announcement 3 weeks ago that sent my world spinning. He called me into his office on a Tuesday morning with Jessica beside him, both wearing expressions that I now recognize were carefully rehearsed. Mark's opening words were delivered with the kind of false concern that immediately put me on alert. He explained that the company was restructuring major account management to better align with our growth strategy and succession planning. Jessica would be taking over primary responsibility for my major accounts, while I would be transitioning to a more strategic, consultative role that would leverage my expertise across multiple client portfolios rather than focusing on individual relationships. The corporate euphemisms were impressive in their creativity, but the message was unmistakable. I was being demoted, my responsibilities were being transferred to Jessica, and my 12 years of relationship building were being discarded in favor of Mark's preferred narrative about who deserved credit for our success. Mark presented this change as a promotion opportunity, suggesting that my new role would involve senior-level strategic consulting and cross-functional leadership development. Jessica nodded along enthusiastically, clearly excited about the advancement opportunity and apparently unaware of the dynamics that had led to this moment. The timeline for this transition was aggressive: 2 weeks to transfer all client relationships, documentation, and ongoing campaign management to Jessica. Mark explained that this rapid timeline was necessary to minimize disruption and ensure seamless continuity for our clients. What he really meant was that he wanted to complete my replacement before I had time to process what was happening or potentially object to the arrangement. My initial response was professional confusion, rather than anger. I asked about the client contracts that specifically named me as the primary relationship manager, wondering how this transition would be handled from a legal and contractual perspective. Mark dismissed these concerns with a wave of his hand, suggesting that contract language was just formality and that clients cared about results, not individual personalities. Jessica looked genuinely surprised to learn about the contractual specifications, clearly unaware that several of our major clients had insisted on this language as a condition of their service agreements. Her expression shifted from excitement to concern as she began to understand the complexity of the situation she was inheriting. Over the following days, as I began the process of transitioning my responsibilities to Jessica, the full scope of what Mark was attempting became clear. He wasn't just replacing me as an account manager. He was trying to rewrite the history of our client relationships to position himself as the architect of our success, and Jessica as the natural successor to implement his vision. The training sessions with Jessica revealed how little Mark actually understood about the day-to-day management of our major accounts. When Jessica asked detailed questions about client decision-making processes, campaign optimization strategies, and relationship management approaches, Mark would deflect to me for the actual answers while maintaining his position as the overall strategic leader. These sessions also revealed Jessica's growing discomfort with the situation. She was smart enough to recognize that she was being asked to replace someone with 12 years of relationship history and institutional knowledge, but without the context or preparation that would make such a transition successful. Her questions became more pointed as she realized the depth of client relationships she was expected to assume overnight. The breaking point was approaching, though none of us realized it at the time. Mark had scheduled a farewell meeting with all major clients for the following Friday, where he planned to introduce Jessica as their new primary contact and present my departure as a strategic advancement that would benefit everyone involved. What Mark didn't know, and what I was about to discover, was that our major clients had been having their own conversations about the changes they were observing at Summit Marketing Solutions. The communication confusion, the additional layers of approval and the hints about personnel changes had not gone unnoticed by the procurement directors and marketing managers who relied on our services. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose 12 years of relationship building, reveal the true value of authentic client partnerships, and demonstrate the difference between taking credit for success and actually creating it. Mark's carefully constructed narrative was about to collide with the reality of contractual obligations and client loyalty that he had never bothered to understand. The first real crack in Mark's facade appeared during what should have been a routine client check-in call with Mountain View Manufacturing. I was leading Jessica through the standard quarterly review process, explaining how we analyzed their campaign performance data and translated metrics into actionable recommendations for the upcoming quarter. Tom Wilson, their marketing director, had always appreciated our thorough approach to performance analysis and strategic planning. Halfway through our presentation, Tom interrupted with a question that caught both Jessica and me off guard. He asked directly about the rumors he'd been hearing from other clients about personnel changes at Summit Marketing Solutions. Word travels fast in Austin's business community, especially when it involves agencies that manage significant marketing budgets for multiple companies. Jessica looked at me uncertainly, clearly unsure how to address client concerns about internal, organizational changes. I found myself in the awkward position of reassuring a longtime client while simultaneously training my own replacement. Tom's concern was genuine and well-founded. He'd invested considerable time and resources in building our partnership, and the prospect of starting over with a new account manager was understandably troubling. After the call ended, Jessica asked me directly about the client relationships and whether the transition would really be as seamless as Mark had suggested. Her question revealed that she was beginning to understand the complexity of what she was inheriting. These weren't just service contracts that could be transferred from one person to another, like files in a cabinet. They were business partnerships built on years of shared experiences, proven results, and personal trust that couldn't be replicated overnight. I spent the next several days walking Jessica through the intricate details of each major account, explaining not just the current campaign strategies, but the historical context that informed every decision. With TechFlow Industries, I detailed how their initial skepticism about digital marketing had evolved into enthusiastic adoption after we proved our understanding of their industry challenges. Their procurement process was notoriously rigorous, and David Rodriguez had initially tested us with small projects before gradually expanding our scope as we consistently exceeded expectations. The relationship with Riverside Retail Group required understanding the seasonal fluctuations of their business, the competitive dynamics in their market, and Carol Anderson's preference for data-driven recommendations presented in narrative format rather than raw spreadsheets. Mountain View Manufacturing's partnership had grown from basic digital advertising to comprehensive market analysis that informed their product development decisions. Each relationship had its own communication, rhythm, decision-making process, and success metrics that reflected years of collaborative refinement. Jessica was taking extensive notes during these training sessions, but I could see the overwhelming nature of what she was trying to absorb. She was essentially being asked to master in 2 weeks what had taken me years to develop through trial, error, and continuous relationship building. Her background in generic digital advertising hadn't prepared her for the consultative approach that our major clients expected and valued. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic as the transition deadline approached. He seemed nervous about something, though I couldn't identify the specific source of his anxiety. He was scheduling more frequent check-ins with Jessica, asking detailed questions about her comfort level with each account, and expressing unusual concern about potential client reactions to the changes. During one of our team meetings, Mark made an offhand comment about ensuring that client contracts were properly structured for the upcoming transition. Bob Williams, who had been quietly observing the situation, asked Mark to clarify what he meant by proper structuring. Mark's response was vague and dismissive, but Bob's expression suggested he understood something that the rest of us were missing. After the meeting, Bob pulled me aside for one of our regular coffee conversations. His concern had deepened considerably since our last discussion, and he was more direct than usual about what he believed was happening. Bob explained that in his experience, when senior management became anxious about client contract language during personnel transitions, it usually meant they hadn't actually read the contracts carefully before making their decisions. Bob's observation prompted me to review my own copies of the client agreements more thoroughly than I had during my initial documentation process. What I discovered was far more significant than I had realized. The contractual language wasn't just standard boilerplate about key personnel. It included specific clauses that had been negotiated by the client's legal teams to protect their interests in case of account management changes. TechFlow Industries' contract included a termination clause that allowed them to exit their agreement within 30 days if I was no longer their primary relationship manager. The clause had been David Rodriguez's idea after their previous agency had assigned their account to a junior associate without notification, resulting in several costly campaign failures and communication breakdowns. Riverside Retail Group's agreement went even further, specifying that any changes in account management required 90 days advance notice and client approval of the replacement personnel. Carol Anderson had insisted on this language after experiencing disruption with two previous agencies that had shuffled account managers without considering the impact on ongoing campaigns and strategic continuity. Mountain View Manufacturing's contract included provisions for reduced fees if key personnel changed without their consent, reflecting Tom Wilson's belief that established relationships were a core component of the value they received from our services. Coastal Construction Company had similar protective language, having learned from expensive experiences with agencies that treated client relationships as interchangeable commodities. The implications of these contractual provisions were staggering. Mark's plan to simply announce my replacement and expect seamless continuity wasn't just unrealistic, it was potentially catastrophic for the company's revenue. If our major clients exercised their contractual rights to terminate or renegotiate their agreements, Summit Marketing Solutions could lose millions in annual revenue virtually overnight. I realized that Mark either hadn't read these contracts carefully or had chosen to ignore their implications, assuming that client relationships were less binding than the legal agreements suggested. His corporate background had apparently convinced him that business relationships were primarily transactional rather than personal, and that clients would accept whatever changes management decided to implement. Armed with this new understanding, I began documenting not just my work processes and client preferences, but also the specific contractual obligations that bound our client relationships. The picture that emerged was clear. My role wasn't just important to these clients. It was legally protected by agreements that they had specifically negotiated to prevent exactly the kind of disruption that Mark was planning. Jessica's training continued, but with a new undercurrent of tension as she began to grasp the precarious nature of her situation. She was being set up to inherit relationships that were contractually tied to me, without the advance notice or client approval that several agreements required. Through no fault of her own, she was walking into a potential legal and business crisis that could destroy both her career prospects and the company's financial stability. The breaking point came sooner than any of us expected. Carol Anderson, from Riverside Retail Group, called me directly on a Wednesday afternoon, bypassing the normal communication channels that Mark had been trying to establish. Her tone was businesslike but concerned, and her message was direct. She had heard from multiple sources that I was leaving Summit Marketing Solutions, and she wanted to understand what this meant for their ongoing campaigns and strategic planning. Carol's call revealed that our clients had been communicating with each other about the changes they were observing at our agency. The Austin business community was smaller than most people realized, and marketing directors from major companies regularly shared information about their vendor relationships during industry events and professional association meetings. During our conversation, Carol referenced specific clauses in their service agreement that required advance notification and approval for account management changes. She had clearly reviewed their contract in preparation for this discussion, and her questions indicated that Riverside Retail Group was prepared to exercise their contractual rights if the transition wasn't handled according to their agreement terms. After ending the call with Carol, I immediately contacted David Rodriguez at TechFlow Industries. His response was equally concerning. He had also been discussing the situation with other clients and was reviewing their contract provisions to understand their options. David's tone suggested that he was not pleased about learning of potential changes through industry gossip, rather than direct communication from our agency. The domino effect was accelerating beyond Mark's control or awareness. What he had planned, as a carefully managed internal personnel change, was becoming a client relations crisis that threatened the foundation of our business. The relationships that I had spent 12 years building were revealing their true value as our clients demonstrated their loyalty and their legal protections. That evening, I called Bob Williams to discuss what was happening with the client. Communications. Bob's response was immediate and emphatic. I needed to inform Mark about the client calls and contractual issues before the situation escalated further. He also suggested that I document everything carefully, as the next few days would likely determine not just my future at the company, but the company's future relationship with its most valuable clients. The following morning, I requested an emergency meeting with Mark to discuss the client feedback I had received. Jessica was included in the meeting, as the issues directly affected her transition timeline and responsibilities. Mark's initial reaction was dismissive. He suggested that client concerns were natural during any transition, and that they would adapt once they saw Jessica's capabilities and enthusiasm. When I mentioned the specific contractual provisions that several clients had referenced, Mark's demeanor changed dramatically. He asked me to repeat the details about termination clauses, advance notice requirements, and client approval processes. His questions revealed that he was hearing about these contract terms for the first time, despite having access to all client agreements as regional director. Jessica looked increasingly uncomfortable as the implications became clear. She was being asked to take over accounts where the clients hadn't been properly notified, hadn't approved her assignment, and had legal grounds to terminate their agreements if they chose to exercise their contractual rights. Her excitement about the advancement opportunity was rapidly transforming into anxiety about being positioned for failure. Mark's response to this information was to schedule individual calls with each major client to clarify the transition process and address any concerns about continuity. He seemed to believe that his charm and senior leadership position would be sufficient to overcome the legal and relationship obstacles that were emerging. The first of these calls was with David Rodriguez from TechFlow Industries, scheduled for the following Tuesday. Mark positioned this as an opportunity to demonstrate his personal commitment to the relationship and to introduce Jessica as someone who shared his strategic vision for their partnership. He seemed confident that his direct involvement would reassure David about the transition's benefits. What Mark didn't anticipate was David's thorough preparation for the conversation. David had not only reviewed their service agreement in detail, but had also consulted with TechFlow's legal team about their options and obligations. His questions during the call were precise, well-informed, and designed to clarify exactly what Summit Marketing Solutions intended to do, and how it aligned with their contractual requirements. David's first question cut straight to the heart of the matter. Why hadn't Summit Marketing Solutions provided the required 90-day advance notice before changing his primary account manager? Mark's response revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. He explained that I wasn't leaving the company, just transitioning to a different role, so advance notice wasn't necessary. David's follow-up question exposed the flaw in Mark's logic. He asked whether Jessica would be assuming primary responsibility for TechFlow's account management, strategic planning, and day-to-day communication. When Mark confirmed that she would, David pointed out that this constituted exactly the kind of change that their contract was designed to address, regardless of my continued employment with the agency. The conversation deteriorated from there. David expressed his dissatisfaction with the lack of proper notification, his concerns about continuity during a critical campaign launch period, and his expectation that contractual obligations would be honored regardless of internal personnel decisions. Mark's attempts to focus on Jessica's qualifications and the agency's commitment to excellence fell flat against David's legitimate contractual concerns. By the end of the call, David had made his position clear. TechFlow Industries expected Summit Marketing Solutions to honor their agreement terms, provide the required notice period, and obtain formal approval before making any changes to their account management structure. If these requirements weren't met, TechFlow would evaluate their options under the contract's termination provisions. Mark ended the call visibly shaken. His confident assumption that clients would accept whatever changes management decided to implement had collided with the reality of binding legal agreements and established business relationships. The power dynamic that he had taken for granted was revealing itself to be far more complex than he had understood. Jessica witnessed this entire conversation, and her expression reflected growing alarm about the situation she was inheriting. She was beginning to understand that her success in this new role wasn't just dependent on her skills and enthusiasm, but also on legal and relationship factors that were completely outside her control. The calls with our other major clients followed similar patterns. Carol Anderson from Riverside Retail Group was equally well prepared and equally firm about contractual compliance. Tom Wilson from Mountain View Manufacturing expressed disappointment about the communication approach and requested detailed information about how the transition would affect their ongoing projects and strategic planning. Each conversation reinforced the same fundamental reality. Our clients viewed their relationships with me as legally protected business partnerships, not casual service arrangements that could be modified unilaterally by agency management. The contractual language that Mark had dismissed as formality was revealing itself as binding legal obligation with significant financial implications. By the end of the week, Mark was facing a client relations crisis that threatened the agency's financial stability and his own position within the company. The situation he had created was spiraling beyond his ability to control or resolve through charm and corporate maneuvering. The relationships that I had built over 12 years were demonstrating their true value as our clients stood firm on their contractual rights and business principles. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the difference between managing people and managing relationships, between taking credit for success and actually creating value, and between corporate authority and client loyalty. Mark's carefully planned personnel transition was about to become a business crisis that would test everyone's true understanding of what made Summit Marketing Solutions successful. The crisis reached its tipping point on a Monday morning when Linda Parker, our founder and CEO, made an unexpected visit to the Austin office. Her unannounced arrival sent ripples of nervous energy through the entire building, as Linda rarely left her headquarters in Dallas unless something significant was happening. Mark scrambled to arrange an impromptu all-hands meeting, clearly caught off guard by her sudden appearance. Linda's reputation within the company was that of a visionary leader who had built Summit Marketing Solutions from nothing into a respected regional agency. However, her hands-off approach to day-to-day operations meant that she relied heavily on regional directors like Mark to manage client relationships and personnel decisions. Her sudden presence suggested that information about our client crisis had reached the executive level, despite Mark's attempts to contain the situation locally. During the hastily organized meeting, Linda's demeanor was professional but noticeably tense. She spoke about the importance of client relationships and the company's reputation for stability and reliability. Her comments seemed directed toward recent challenges without specifically mentioning the personnel changes or client concerns that had been escalating over the past week. After the general meeting concluded, Linda requested individual sessions with key team members. My meeting was scheduled for late afternoon, giving me time to prepare for what I suspected would be a detailed discussion about the client situations and contractual issues that had emerged. Bob Williams, who had been with the company since its early days, was scheduled before me. and his expression when he left Linda's temporary office suggested that their conversation had been both lengthy and serious. When my turn came, Linda's approach was direct and well-informed. She had clearly been briefed on the client concerns, contractual provisions, and the timeline of events that had led to the current crisis. Her questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of client relationship management and the legal implications of personnel changes in service-based businesses. Linda began by asking about my understanding of the contractual language in our major client agreements. Her knowledge of these specific provisions surprised me, as I had assumed that operational details like contract terms were delegated to regional management. Her questions indicated that she had personally reviewed the agreements and understood their implications for the company's revenue and legal obligations. During our conversation, Linda revealed information that fundamentally changed my understanding of the situation. She explained that Summit Marketing Solutions had been considering expansion opportunities that would require significant capital investment, and that our major client contracts represented a substantial portion of the collateral that potential investors would evaluate. The stability and transferability of these relationships was crucial to the company's growth strategy and financial future. Linda's revelation explained why client retention and relationship continuity were more critical than I had realized. The contractual language that protected my role wasn't just important for operational reasons. It was a significant factor in the company's valuation and investment prospects. Any disruption to these major accounts could jeopardize expansion, plans that had been years in the making. As our conversation continued, Linda asked about my career goals and interest in expanded responsibilities within the organization. Her questions suggested possibilities that went far beyond the limited advancement opportunities that Mark had consistently offered. She seemed genuinely interested in my perspective on client relationship management and strategic account development. Linda also inquired about Jessica's transition and my assessment of her readiness to assume primary responsibility for major account management. I tried to be diplomatic in my response, acknowledging Jessica's enthusiasm and potential while honestly addressing the challenges she would face in managing established client relationships with complex contractual requirements. The conversation concluded with Linda requesting that I postpone any final decisions about my role transition until she could complete her assessment of the situation. Her tone suggested that significant changes were being considered at the executive level, though she didn't provide specific details about what those changes might involve. Meanwhile, the client situation continued deteriorating despite Mark's attempts at damage control. David Rodriguez from TechFlow Industries had scheduled a meeting for Wednesday to discuss their account status and future arrangements. His assistant's email indicated that TechFlow's legal team would be participating in the discussion, suggesting that they were preparing to exercise their contractual options if their concerns weren't adequately addressed. Carol Anderson from Riverside Retail Group had taken a different approach, requesting a formal written response to her concerns about notification requirements and transition planning. Her request for written documentation indicated that Riverside was building a record of the agency's compliance with contractual obligations, potentially as preparation for legal action if necessary. Tom Wilson from Mountain View Manufacturing had been more diplomatic in his communications, but his questions about alternative arrangements and backup plans suggested that he was also evaluating his options. The fact that all three major clients were simultaneously questioning the transition indicated that word had spread throughout Austin's business community about the personnel changes at Summit Marketing Solutions. Mark's stress level was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone in the office. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety and irritability. He was scheduling frequent meetings with Jessica to review her preparation for client interactions, but these sessions seemed to increase rather than reduce her nervousness about the responsibilities she was inheriting. During one of these preparation sessions, I overheard Mark coaching Jessica on how to handle client questions about contractual provisions and transition timelines. His advice revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the legal and relationship dynamics involved. He was essentially teaching Jessica to downplay legitimate client concerns and redirect conversations toward general assurances about service quality and commitment. Jessica's discomfort with this approach was obvious. She was smart enough to recognize that clients' contractual concerns were legitimate and couldn't be resolved through deflection or generic reassurances. Her questions during the coaching session revealed her growing awareness that she was being positioned to make promises that might not be legally sound or practically achievable. Bob Williams had been observing these developments with increasing concern. During one of our coffee conversations, he shared his assessment that Mark was leading the company toward a crisis that could have severe financial and legal consequences. Bob's experience with similar situations at other agencies had taught him to recognize the warning signs of impending client defections and potential litigation. Bob also revealed that he had been having informal conversations with Linda Parker about the situation. His long-standing relationship with the company's founder gave him access and credibility that allowed him to communicate concerns that might not reach executive management through normal channels. Bob's input was apparently one of the factors that had prompted Linda's sudden visit to Austin. The Wednesday meeting with TechFlow Industries arrived with all the tension of a high-stakes negotiation. David Rodriguez attended with TechFlow's legal counsel and procurement manager, while Mark brought Jessica and requested that I participate as well. The meeting was held in our main conference room, and the formal atmosphere immediately signaled that this was more than a routine client discussion. David began the meeting by outlining TechFlow's position regarding their service agreement and the proposed personnel changes. His presentation was thorough, professional, and legally precise. He referenced specific contract clauses, notification requirements, and approval processes that Summit Marketing Solutions had failed to follow in planning the transition. Mark's response revealed the depth of his miscalculation. He attempted to characterize the situation as a minor internal reorganization that wouldn't affect service quality or client relationships. His explanation completely ignored the contractual requirements that David had outlined and seemed to suggest that client concerns were based on misunderstanding rather than legitimate legal and business issues. David's reaction to Mark's dismissive response was controlled, but clearly negative. He asked direct questions about Summit Marketing Solutions' understanding of their contractual obligations and commitment to honoring the agreement terms that TechFlow had specifically negotiated to protect their interests. When Mark continued to minimize the significance of the contractual provisions, David's legal counsel intervened with pointed questions about the agency's interpretation of key contract clauses. The lawyer's involvement transformed the discussion from a business meeting into something approaching a legal deposition, with each response carefully noted and potential implications clearly understood by all parties. Jessica watched this exchange with growing alarm, realizing that she was witnessing the potential collapse of a major client relationship that she was supposed to inherit. Her preparation for account management hadn't included training for legal confrontations or contract disputes, and she was clearly unprepared for the complexity of the situation she was entering. The turning point in the meeting came when David directly asked me about my understanding of TechFlow's contractual requirements and my role in the proposed transition. His question put me in a difficult position, as answering honestly would contradict Mark's characterization of the situation, while avoiding the question would compromise my professional integrity and relationship with a longtime client. I chose to answer David's question truthfully, explaining my understanding of the contract provisions and acknowledging that the proposed transition didn't align with the notification and approval requirements that TechFlow had negotiated. My response created visible tension in the room, as it directly contradicted Mark's position and validated David's concerns about contractual compliance. Mark's reaction to my honesty was immediate and poorly controlled. He attempted to characterize my response as an overinterpretation of standard contract language, but his explanation lacked credibility given the specific nature of the provisions that David's legal team had identified. The contradiction between Mark's dismissive attitude and my acknowledgement of legitimate contractual issues further damaged Summit Marketing Solutions' position in the negotiation. David concluded the meeting by stating that TechFlow Industries would need time to evaluate their options under the service agreement. His tone was professional but firm, and his reference to evaluating options clearly implied that contract termination was under serious consideration. He requested written confirmation of Summit Marketing Solutions' position regarding contractual compliance and transition planning within 48 hours. After TechFlow's team departed, the atmosphere in the conference room was tense and uncomfortable. Mark was visibly angry about my truthful responses to David's questions, while Jessica appeared overwhelmed by the legal and business complexity she had witnessed. The meeting had exposed the fundamental flaws in Mark's approach and the precarious position that his decisions had created for everyone involved. Mark's immediate reaction was to schedule an emergency meeting with Linda Parker to discuss the TechFlow situation and its implications for other client relationships. His phone call to Dallas was brief but intense, and his expression afterward suggested that the conversation hadn't gone well. Linda's response apparently included instructions for immediate action to address the client crisis before it spread further. That afternoon, similar meetings were scheduled with representatives from Riverside Retail Group and Mountain View Manufacturing. The pattern that emerged from these discussions was consistent. All of our major clients had legitimate contractual concerns about the proposed personnel changes, and all were prepared to exercise their legal options if those concerns weren't adequately addressed. Carol Anderson from Riverside Retail Group was particularly direct in her communications. She had consulted with her company's legal team and was prepared to invoke the termination clauses in their service agreement if Summit Marketing Solutions didn't comply with the notification and approval requirements within the specified timeframe. Her ultimatum was clear and non-negotiable. Tom Wilson from Mountain View Manufacturing took a slightly different approach, requesting a formal transition plan that addressed their contractual requirements and provided guarantees about service continuity. His demands were reasonable but detailed, requiring commitments that Mark was reluctant to make, given the uncertainty surrounding Jessica's readiness and the legal implications of the contractual provisions. By Thursday evening, Mark was facing a coordinated client rebellion that threatened to destroy the agency's revenue base and his own career prospects. The personnel change that he had planned as a simple internal reorganization had evolved into a potential business catastrophe with legal, financial, and strategic implications that extended far beyond his initial calculations. Linda Parker's response to the crisis was swift and decisive. She scheduled an emergency executive meeting for Friday morning, to be attended by all senior management and key personnel involved in the client relationships. The agenda was broad but focused, addressing the immediate client concerns while developing a long-term strategy for preventing similar crises in the future. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just my future at Summit Marketing Solutions, but the company's ability to maintain its most valuable client relationships and continue its growth trajectory. Mark's miscalculations had created a crisis that required immediate resolution, and the solutions would necessarily involve fundamental changes to both personnel decisions and management approaches. Friday morning arrived with the weight of months of mounting tension, and the knowledge that the day's meetings would reshape the dynamics of our agency permanently. The client relationships that I had spent 12 years building were about to demonstrate their true value, while Mark's assumptions about corporate authority and client management were facing their ultimate test. The emergency executive meeting began at 8 o'clock sharp on Friday morning, with Linda Parker presiding over what felt more like a corporate tribunal than a business discussion. The conference room was arranged with military precision, Linda at the head of the table, flanked by her legal counsel and chief financial officer who had driven down from Dallas overnight. Mark sat rigidly in his usual seat, with Jessica beside him looking pale and uncertain. Bob Williams was present as the senior account manager, while I occupied a chair that felt simultaneously central and isolated. Linda's opening statement, cut through any pretense of this being a routine management meeting. She announced that Summit Marketing Solutions was facing its most serious client crisis in company history, with potential revenue losses that could exceed $12 million annually. Her tone was clinical and precise, but the implications were devastating. 3 major clients were threatening contract termination. 2 others were demanding immediate clarification of personnel changes, and the agency's reputation in Austin's business community was suffering significant damage. The financial analysis that Linda's CFO presented was sobering in its detail. He had calculated the immediate revenue impact of losing each major client, the cascade effects on smaller accounts that relied on our major client success stories, and the long-term implications for the company's valuation and expansion plans. The numbers painted a picture of potential catastrophe that went far beyond Mark's simple personnel reorganization. Linda's legal counsel then presented an overview of the contractual obligations that Summit Marketing Solutions had potentially violated. Her analysis was thorough and damning, highlighting specific clauses that required advance notification, client approval processes, and transition planning that had been completely ignored in Mark's approach to the personnel changes. The legal exposure included not just contract termination rights, but potential damages for breach of agreement and failure to honor negotiated terms. Mark's response to this presentation revealed the depth of his miscalculation and his inability to grasp the severity of the situation he had created. He began by defending his decision-making process, explaining that personnel changes were normal business operations that shouldn't require client approval or extended notification periods. His characterization of the contractual provisions as standard boilerplate language demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of the legal protections that our clients had specifically negotiated. Linda's reaction to Mark's explanation was swift and cutting. She asked him directly whether he had reviewed the client contracts before implementing the personnel changes, and when he acknowledged that he had relied on his general understanding, rather than detailed contract analysis, her expression conveyed both disappointment and anger. The revelation that Mark had made major decisions affecting millions in revenue without proper legal review exposed a level of negligence that went beyond simple oversight. Jessica's position in this meeting was particularly uncomfortable, as she was simultaneously a victim of Mark's poor planning and a potential solution to the crisis if handled correctly. Linda's questions to Jessica were designed to assess her capabilities and readiness for major account management, but also to understand her perspective on the impossible situation she had been placed in. Jessica's responses demonstrated both her intelligence and her growing awareness of the complexity she faced. She acknowledged that her training period had revealed the depth of client relationships and the sophisticated nature of the account management required for our major clients. Her honest assessment was that she needed significantly more preparation and support to successfully manage these relationships, particularly given the contractual complications that had emerged. When Linda asked Jessica directly about her comfort level with assuming primary responsibility for accounts where clients had expressed serious concerns about the transition, Jessica's answer was refreshingly honest. She admitted that she felt unprepared for the legal and relationship challenges involved, and that she would prefer to continue learning under supervision rather than being thrown into crisis management situations. The focus then shifted to me, and Linda's questions were designed to understand both my perspective on the client relationships and my willingness to continue managing them given the circumstances. Her approach was professional, but clearly recognized that I held the key to resolving the immediate crisis and maintaining the agency's financial stability. Linda asked me to walk through each major client relationship, explaining the specific concerns that had been raised, and my assessment of what would be required to address their contractual and business requirements. My presentation was detailed and honest, acknowledging both the challenges and the potential solutions if proper processes were followed. When Linda asked directly about my willingness to remain as primary contact for these accounts, I found myself in a position of unexpected leverage. The crisis had revealed that my role wasn't just important to the clients, it was essential to the company's survival. My response was careful but firm, explaining that I was committed to the client relationships but needed assurance that future personnel decisions would be made with proper consideration of contractual obligations and client requirements. The turning point in the meeting came when Linda asked Mark to explain his rationale for the timing and approach of the personnel changes. Mark's response revealed that his decision had been motivated less by business necessity than by his desire to position Jessica as his preferred successor and to reduce my influence within the organization. His explanation inadvertently exposed the personal and political motivations behind decisions that had been presented as strategic business moves. Linda's reaction to this revelation was immediate and decisive. She announced that the personnel changes would be suspended pending a complete review of client contracts, relationship management requirements, and proper transition planning. Mark's authority to make unilateral decisions affecting major client relationships was revoked, and all future personnel changes would require executive approval after thorough legal and business analysis. The immediate crisis management plan that emerged from the meeting was comprehensive and urgent. Linda would personally contact each major client to acknowledge the mishandling of the situation and to guarantee that their contractual requirements would be honored. I would resume full responsibility for major account management, with Jessica continuing as an assistant and trainee under proper supervision. Mark would be removed from direct client contact while the company reviewed his role and responsibilities. Linda's announcement about Mark's reduced authority created a moment of stunned silence in the room. The regional director, who had wielded considerable power over personnel decisions and client relationships, was suddenly stripped of his primary responsibilities. Mark's expression revealed his shock at the swift reversal of fortune, while Jessica looked relieved to be removed from an impossible situation. The legal counsel's role in the crisis resolution was equally important. She would work directly with each client's legal team to address contractual concerns and to develop proper documentation for any future personnel changes. Her involvement signaled to clients that Summit Marketing Solutions was taking their contractual rights seriously and was committed to compliance with negotiated terms. Bob Williams was asked to serve as interim oversight for account management, while the company developed new procedures for client relationship management and personnel transitions. His experience and client relationships made him an ideal bridge between the crisis and the long-term solutions that would be required. The meeting concluded with Linda outlining the timeline for crisis resolution and the consequences for future failures to properly manage client relationships. Her message was clear. Client contracts would be honored, relationship management would be professionalized, and personnel decisions would be made with full consideration of business and legal implications. As the formal meeting ended, Linda requested individual conversations with each participant to address specific concerns and expectations. My conversation with Linda was extensive and career-defining, as she outlined her vision for restructuring account management and my potential role in that restructuring. Linda's proposal exceeded anything I had imagined possible. She offered me the position of Director of Client Relations, with expanded authority over major account management, personnel decisions affecting client relationships, and strategic planning for client retention and growth. The role included significant compensation increases, equity participation in the company's expansion plans, and direct reporting to executive management rather than regional supervision. The offer came with expectations that matched its rewards. Linda expected me to develop comprehensive client relationship management protocols, to establish proper procedures for personnel transitions, and to build systems that would prevent future crises. She also wanted me to lead the company's expansion into new markets, using my relationship management expertise to establish Summit Marketing Solutions as a regional leader in client-focused marketing services. My conversation with Linda also addressed the immediate crisis resolution. She wanted me to personally contact each major client to explain the changes that were being implemented and to provide guarantees about contract compliance and relationship continuity. These conversations would be crucial to maintaining client confidence and preventing the revenue losses that threatened the company's stability. The timeline for crisis resolution was aggressive, but necessary. Client communications needed to begin immediately, with formal documentation of the new arrangements provided within 48 hours. The company's legal team would work over the weekend to ensure that all contractual requirements were properly addressed and that client concerns were resolved before business resumed on Monday. Linda's individual conversation with Mark was brief and decisive. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see that the discussion was intense and one-sided, with Linda doing most of the talking while Mark listened with increasing discomfort. When they emerged, Mark's expression revealed that his role at Summit Marketing Solutions had been fundamentally altered, if not terminated entirely. Jessica's conversation with Linda was more positive, focusing on her potential for growth within the organization and her role in the restructured account management system. Linda recognized that Jessica had been unfairly positioned by Mark's poor planning and was committed to providing her with proper training and advancement opportunities. That didn't depend on inheriting impossible situations. Bob Williams's conversation with Linda was collaborative and forward-looking, as they discussed the structural changes needed to prevent similar crises in the future. Bob's experience and institutional knowledge made him invaluable in developing new procedures and training programs that would professionalize the agency's approach to client relationship management. The afternoon was spent in intensive client communications, with Linda personally reaching out to each major client to explain the situation and the corrective measures being implemented. Her calls were professionally handled but clearly apologetic, acknowledging the agency's mistakes while providing concrete assurances about future compliance with contractual requirements. David Rodriguez from TechFlow Industries was the first client contacted, and his response set the tone for the other conversations. He appreciated Linda's direct approach and personal involvement in resolving the situation, but made clear that TechFlow's future relationship with Summit Marketing Solutions would depend on demonstrated compliance with their agreement terms and guaranteed continuity in account management. Carol Anderson from Riverside Retail Group was equally direct in her expectations, demanding written confirmation of the personnel arrangements and timeline commitments that would satisfy their contractual requirements. Her response indicated that Riverside was prepared to continue the relationship if proper procedures were followed, but that they would not tolerate future mishandling of their account. Tom Wilson from Mountain View Manufacturing expressed relief that the situation was being addressed at the executive level, but requested detailed transition planning that would ensure continuity during the restructuring process. His concerns were practical and reasonable, focusing on campaign continuity and strategic planning rather than punitive measures. By the end of the day, the immediate crisis had been contained through Linda's decisive action and personal involvement. The client relationships were stabilized, the legal exposure was being addressed, and the personnel issues were resolved through proper restructuring rather than Mark's misguided approach. The weekend was spent in intensive preparation for the new arrangements, with legal documentation prepared for each client relationship and comprehensive communication plans developed to ensure transparency and compliance. The company's legal team worked around the clock to address every contractual concern and to establish procedures that would prevent future violations. Monday morning arrived with a sense of cautious optimism and fundamental change. The crisis had been resolved, but the lessons learned would reshape Summit Marketing Solutions permanently. Client relationships would be treated as the valuable business assets they were. Personnel decisions would be made with proper legal and business consideration, and the agency's approach to account management would be professionalized to prevent similar disasters. Mark's departure from the company was announced quietly, with Linda handling the communication personally to ensure that clients and staff understood the changes without creating additional uncertainty. His role in creating the crisis had made his continued employment impossible, and his departure was presented as a mutual decision based on differing visions for client relationship management. The transformation of Summit Marketing Solutions from a crisis-ridden agency to a professionally managed organization would take months to complete, but the foundation was established during that crucial weekend. Client relationships were secured, legal compliance was ensured, and the management structure was reorganized to prioritize the relationships that generated the company's success. 6 months after that transformative Friday morning meeting, I found myself standing in the newly renovated corner office that came with my position as Director of Client Relations, watching the Austin skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected both the city's growth and my own professional evolution. The view from the 32nd floor was spectacular, but more meaningful was the transformation that had occurred within Summit Marketing Solutions and my role in shaping that change. The immediate aftermath of the crisis had required intense focus and careful relationship rebuilding that tested every skill I had developed over 12 years in the industry. My first priority was personally visiting each major client to have face-to-face conversations about the changes at Summit Marketing Solutions and to provide concrete assurances about our commitment to honoring contractual obligations and maintaining the partnership standards they had come to expect. David Rodriguez at TechFlow Industries was my first visit, and the conversation set the tone for rebuilding trust across our entire client portfolio. David's office overlooked the manufacturing floor where TechFlow's innovative automation systems were assembled, and as we talked about the future of our partnership, I could see the tangible results of the marketing strategies we had developed together over the years. The digital transformation that had begun with our initial campaign had evolved into a comprehensive market positioning that had helped TechFlow become a regional leader in industrial automation. David's response to the crisis resolution was professionally cautious, but personally encouraging. He acknowledged that Summit Marketing Solutions had handled the situation appropriately once Linda Parker became involved, and he appreciated the personal accountability that my visit demonstrated. However, he also made clear that TechFlow's continued partnership would depend on demonstrated performance and adherence to the professional standards that our contractual relationship specified. During our meeting, David revealed information that provided valuable insight into how the crisis had been perceived within Austin's business community. He explained that marketing directors from several major companies had been discussing the personnel changes at Summit Marketing Solutions during a recent industry association meeting. The consensus among this group was that agencies that didn't properly value their key relationship managers often struggled to maintain client satisfaction and campaign effectiveness. David's feedback reinforced something I had learned during the crisis but hadn't fully appreciated before. Client loyalty in the marketing services industry was deeply personal and based on trust that developed over years of successful collaboration. The contractual provisions that protected my role weren't just legal formalities. They were clients' way of ensuring that the relationships they valued would be maintained regardless of internal agency politics or management changes. My visit to Riverside Retail Group provided additional perspective on how the crisis had affected client confidence and what would be required to fully restore their trust in our partnership. Carol Anderson's office was decorated with photographs from retail locations across 3 states, visual reminders of the scale and complexity of the marketing challenges that our campaigns addressed on their behalf. Carol's approach to discussing the crisis was characteristically direct and business-focused. She acknowledged that Summit Marketing Solutions had corrected the immediate problems, but she wanted detailed information about the structural changes that would prevent similar issues in the future. Her questions revealed that she had researched our company's management structure and wanted assurance that client relationship decisions would be made with appropriate oversight and professional consideration. The conversation with Carol also addressed the broader implications of the crisis for our ongoing strategic partnership. Riverside Retail Group was planning a significant expansion into new markets over the following year, and the marketing support for that expansion would represent a substantial increase in our partnership scope and revenue. Carol needed confidence that Summit Marketing Solutions could provide the consistent, high-level relationship management that such an important initiative would require. Carol's expansion plans represented exactly the kind of growth opportunity that Linda Parker had envisioned when she restructured the agency's client relationship management approach. The crisis had revealed weaknesses in our organizational structure, but it had also demonstrated the strength of the client relationships that formed the foundation of our business success. Properly managed, these relationships could support significant growth and expansion that would benefit both the agency and our clients. Mountain View Manufacturing presented a different but equally important perspective on the crisis and its resolution. Tom Wilson's office was filled with prototypes and technical drawings that illustrated the innovative products his company brought to market. And our conversation focused on how marketing strategy needed to evolve alongside product development and market positioning. Tom's assessment of the crisis was that it had actually strengthened our partnership by forcing both organizations to clarify expectations and communication processes. He appreciated the transparency that Linda Parker had brought to resolving the situation, and he was interested in exploring expanded collaboration that would integrate marketing strategy more closely with Mountain View's product development and market expansion plans. The conversation with Tom also revealed an opportunity that hadn't existed before the crisis. Mountain View Manufacturing was considering acquiring smaller companies in related industries, and they needed marketing expertise to evaluate target companies and integrate acquired brands into their existing portfolio. This type of strategic consulting represented a natural evolution of our partnership and a significant revenue opportunity for Summit Marketing Solutions. Coastal Construction Company provided the final piece of client feedback about the crisis and its resolution. Their headquarters featured a gallery of photographs showcasing major projects across the Southwest, from office complexes to infrastructure developments that had shaped the region's growth over the past decade. The scale and complexity of their business required marketing approaches that could communicate technical expertise while appealing to diverse audiences from municipal planners to private developers. The crisis had concerned coastal construction primarily because their industry required long-term relationship stability for effective marketing execution. Construction projects often took years to complete, and marketing campaigns needed consistent management and strategic continuity throughout extended sales cycles. The personnel changes that Mark had planned would have disrupted campaigns that were already in progress and potentially compromised results that depended on relationship consistency. My conversation with Coastal Construction's leadership team revealed another significant opportunity that emerged from the crisis resolution. They were planning to expand operations into new geographic markets and needed marketing expertise to establish brand recognition and generate qualified leads in unfamiliar territories. This expansion represented both a revenue opportunity for Summit Marketing Solutions and a chance to apply our relationship management expertise in new contexts. The client visits and relationship rebuilding efforts occupied most of my first month in the Director of Client Relations role. But they also provided invaluable insights into how the crisis had affected perceptions of Summit Marketing Solutions and what opportunities existed for strengthening our market position. The feedback from clients was consistently positive about the resolution approach, but it also revealed expectations for continued professionalization and strategic evolution. Jessica Chen's role in the post-crisis organization evolved significantly from the impossible position that Mark had originally created for her. Instead of being thrust into primary responsibility for established client relationships, she was assigned to work directly with me on developing new client acquisition strategies and supporting expanded services for existing clients. This arrangement allowed her to learn proper relationship management techniques while contributing meaningfully to the agency's growth objectives. Jessica's enthusiasm and fresh perspective proved valuable in developing innovative approaches to client communication and campaign development. Her background in digital advertising complemented my relationship management expertise, and together we created service offerings that addressed emerging client needs while building on the trust and credibility that our established partnerships provided. One of Jessica's most significant contributions was developing a systematic approach to client onboarding, that ensured new relationships began with clear expectations, proper documentation, and the kind of personal attention that had made our major account relationships so successful. Her work on standardizing these processes helped Summit Marketing Solutions scale our relationship management approach without sacrificing the personalized service that clients valued. Bob Williams' transition into semi-retirement proceeded smoothly, with his institutional knowledge and relationship management wisdom being systematically documented and shared throughout the organization. Bob's mentorship had been crucial during the crisis, and his continued involvement in training and development helped ensure that the lessons learned would benefit the entire agency. Bob's perspective on the crisis and its resolution was that it had revealed both the strength and vulnerability of relationship-based business models. The client loyalty that had protected Summit Marketing Solutions during the crisis was a valuable asset, but it also created responsibilities and obligations that required sophisticated management and organizational commitment. Under Bob's guidance, we developed comprehensive training programs for client relationship management that would prevent future personnel from making the kinds of mistakes that had created the crisis. These programs emphasize the legal, financial, and strategic importance of client relationships, while providing practical tools for building and maintaining the trust that effective partnerships required. Linda Parker's leadership during and after the crisis established her as a more hands-on CEO who understood the operational details that drove the company's success. Her decision to restructure the organization around client relationship management rather than traditional corporate hierarchy created a more responsive and effective business model that better served both clients and employees. Linda's vision for Summit Marketing Solutions' future growth was ambitious, but grounded in the relationship management principles that had enabled us to survive and learn from the crisis. She wanted to establish the agency as the regional leader in client-focused marketing services, with expansion into new markets supported by the systematic relationship management approaches we had developed. The expansion strategy that Linda outlined included opening offices in other Texas cities, acquiring smaller agencies with established client relationships, and developing specialized service offerings that would differentiate Summit Marketing Solutions from competitors who focused primarily on creative execution rather than strategic partnership. My role in this expansion strategy was to lead the development of relationship management systems and training programs that could be replicated in new locations while maintaining the personalized approach that had made our Austin office successful. This responsibility represented both a significant career opportunity and a chance to influence the professional development of marketing professionals throughout the region. The systematic documentation of client relationship management processes became a major project that occupied several months and involved collaboration with legal counsel, financial analysts, and operational managers throughout the organization. The goal was to create comprehensive procedures that would ensure consistent service delivery while protecting both the agency and clients from the kinds of misunderstandings that had created the crisis. This documentation project revealed the complexity and sophistication of effective client relationship management in ways that hadn't been obvious when the work was being performed intuitively based on experience and personal judgment. The systematic analysis required to create proper procedures helped identify best practices that could be taught and replicated, while also highlighting potential risk areas that required special attention and oversight. The legal review of our client relationship management practices resulted in significant improvements to contract language, communication procedures, and documentation requirements that better protected all parties while facilitating more effective collaboration. The investment in legal expertise that the crisis had necessitated proved valuable beyond the immediate problem resolution, as it established foundations for more sophisticated business relationships and expanded service offerings. The financial analysis of client relationship value provided insights that influenced both compensation structures and business development strategies. The crisis had demonstrated that client relationships were the agency's most valuable assets, and proper financial analysis revealed the long-term revenue implications of relationship quality and continuity. This financial perspective supported arguments for increased investment in relationship management training, higher compensation for client-facing personnel, and more sophisticated approaches to measuring and rewarding performance based on relationship quality, rather than just short-term revenue generation. The cultural transformation of Summit Marketing Solutions was perhaps the most significant long-term outcome of the crisis and its resolution. The agency evolved from a traditional advertising firm with hierarchical management to a client-focused organization where relationship quality and service excellence were the primary measures of success. This cultural change affected hiring, practices, performance evaluation, compensation structures, and strategic planning throughout the organization. Employees were selected and promoted based on their ability to build and maintain client relationships, rather than just technical skills or corporate political acumen. The training programs that we developed emphasized professional development, ethical business practices, and the sophisticated communication skills required for effective client partnership. These programs attracted high-quality personnel who were interested in building meaningful careers in client relationship management, rather than just executing tactical marketing activities. The industry recognition that Summit Marketing Solutions received following the crisis resolution was gratifying, but also strategically valuable. Our approach to client relationship management and crisis resolution became a case study that was discussed at industry conferences and featured in professional publications. This recognition attracted attention from potential clients who were looking for agencies that prioritized relationship quality and professional service delivery. It also helped recruit talented professionals who wanted to work for an organization with a reputation for ethical business practices and employee development. The speaking opportunities that resulted from this industry recognition allowed me to share insights about client relationship management with marketing professionals throughout the region. These presentations helped establish Summit Marketing Solutions as a thought leader in relationship-based marketing services, while also providing valuable networking opportunities that supported business development efforts. The personal satisfaction of successfully navigating the crisis and building a more professional and effective organization was considerable. But the career opportunities that emerged were equally important. The Director of Client Relations position provided challenges and responsibilities that utilized all of my experience, while also requiring continuous learning and professional development. The compensation increases and equity participation that accompanied the promotion were significant, but more important was the opportunity to influence the direction of an organization and to help shape the careers of other marketing professionals. The mentorship and training responsibilities that came with the role were personally fulfilling and professionally enriching. The expanded responsibilities also required developing new skills in areas like strategic planning, financial analysis, and organizational development that complemented my relationship management expertise. These learning opportunities enhanced my professional credentials, while also contributing to the agency's overall capabilities and competitive position. Looking back on the crisis and its aftermath, I realized that Mark's attempt to replace me had actually created opportunities for advancement and professional development that might not have emerged under normal circumstances. The crisis had forced Linda Parker to examine the organizational structure and management practices that had enabled such poor decision-making, and the changes that resulted were beneficial for everyone, except those who had created the problems. Mark's departure from Summit Marketing Solutions was handled professionally and quietly, with minimal disruption to ongoing operations or client relationships. His replacement was recruited from outside the organization specifically for expertise in client relationship management and ethical business practices, ensuring that the cultural changes we had implemented would be maintained and strengthened. The lessons learned from Mark's failures became part of the training programs and management development initiatives that we established to prevent similar problems in the future. His experience served as a cautionary example of how personal Ambition and poor judgment could create serious business risks when not balanced by professional ethics and systematic oversight. Jessica's professional development in the post-crisis environment exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. The proper training and mentorship that she received allowed her to build genuine expertise in client relationship management, while contributing meaningfully to the agency's success. Her advancement became a positive example of how professional development should be handled, in contrast to the impossible situation that Mark had originally created. The client relationships that had been threatened during the crisis became stronger and more valuable as a result of the professional improvements and systematic attention that followed. The contracts that had protected my role became templates for expanded service agreements that provided greater security and opportunity for both the agency and our clients. TechFlow Industries' expansion of our partnership included strategic consulting services that went beyond traditional marketing support to include market analysis, competitive intelligence, and business development planning. This evolution demonstrated how strong client relationships could develop into comprehensive business partnerships that provided value far beyond the original service scope. Riverside Retail Group's multi-state expansion project became a showcase for our refined client relationship management approach. With systematic coordination between multiple locations and service teams that maintained consistent quality and communication throughout a complex extended engagement. The success of this project established new standards for large-scale client management that influenced our approach to other major accounts. Mountain View Manufacturing's acquisition support services represented a new revenue stream that emerged directly from the trust and credibility that our relationship management approach had established. Their confidence in our expertise and judgment enabled them to engage us for strategic consulting that required access to confidential business, information, and influence over important corporate decisions. Coastal Construction Company's geographic expansion provided opportunities to apply our relationship management expertise in new markets while supporting a valued client's growth objectives. This work required adapting our approaches to different regional business cultures while maintaining the consistent service quality that had made the original relationship successful. The expansion of Summit Marketing Solutions into new markets and service areas proceeded ahead of schedule and under budget, supported by the systematic relationship management approaches and professional standards that had emerged from the crisis. The investment in proper procedures and training paid dividends in terms of both operational efficiency and client satisfaction. The Austin office became the model for organizational structure and client relationship management that was replicated in new locations throughout Texas and surrounding states. The systems and procedures that we had developed were successfully adapted to different markets while maintaining the core principles that had made them effective. The acquisition of smaller agencies provided opportunities to integrate relationship management expertise with specialized technical capabilities, creating more comprehensive service offerings while expanding our geographic reach and client base. These acquisitions were structured to preserve valuable client relationships while improving service delivery through enhanced resources and professional standards. The regional leadership position that Summit Marketing Solutions achieved in client-focused marketing services was recognized through industry awards, client testimonials, and competitive analysis that confirmed our distinctive market position. This recognition supported premium pricing strategies and attracted high-quality clients who valued professional service delivery over low-cost alternatives. 2 years after the crisis that had threatened to destroy everything I had built over 12 years, I found myself leading an organization that was stronger, more professional, and more successful than anyone had imagined possible. The client relationships that had seemed threatened were now more valuable and secure than ever, protected by systematic procedures and professional standards that ensured consistent service delivery, regardless of personnel changes or organizational evolution. The personal growth and professional development that had resulted from successfully navigating the crisis and building a better organization were immeasurable. The skills I had developed in relationship management, crisis resolution, Strategic planning and organizational leadership had opened career opportunities that extended far beyond the marketing services industry. The satisfaction of building something meaningful and lasting, of developing other professionals and contributing to their success, and of creating value for clients and colleagues alike, was more rewarding than any individual achievement or recognition. The crisis that had initially seemed like a career-ending catastrophe had actually become the foundation for professional growth and personal fulfillment that exceeded my highest aspirations. The transformation of Summit Marketing Solutions from a crisis-ridden agency to a regional leader in professional marketing services demonstrated the power of ethical business practices, systematic relationship management, and organizational commitment to excellence. The lessons learned during those challenging months became the foundation for sustained success and continued growth that benefited everyone involved. The story of how Mark's attempt to replace me had backfired so spectacularly became a cautionary tale that was shared throughout the industry, but more importantly, it became a foundation for positive change that created opportunities and value for clients, colleagues, and the organization as a whole. Standing in my corner office, watching the Austin skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point, I felt grateful for the crisis that had revealed both the strength of the relationships I had built and the opportunities that emerged when those relationships were properly valued and professionally managed. The 12 years of relationship building had not only survived Mark's attempt to erase my contributions, but had become the foundation for achievements that exceeded anything I had previously imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.